Joining us now live here in our Washington bureau is Marc Short, the former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence, Republican strategist. Marc, it's great to have you. You've heard this whole conversation, and we were just watching the president together here. The link between Tylenol and autism in children is being delineated by this White House. What will be the response from the president's base? A boycott of Tylenol?
I'm not so sure that that'll be the case. I mean, I think that there's obviously been a rise in cases, and it's good the administration is trying to get to the bottom of it. I happen to believe it's probably because we're better at diagnosing the problem today. And so when you make a comparison to Cuba, they probably don't have the ability to diagnose cases.
Right.
And I think the reality is for a lot of expectant moms and parents, they probably are going to take a second to say, I mean, the HHS secretary is somebody who has boasted about his heroin addiction and taking that instead of ADHD medicine in college. He tells people to drink raw milk, and he still boasts about taking testosterone injections at 70. So I would imagine that a lot of expectant parents will probably look at that and say, you know, maybe this is not the person I should be taking my health care advice from.
Wow. Okay.
Marc, if there is significant backlash here, do you see the president splitting with his HHS secretary? In other words, will RFK Jr. still have the president's ear?
I think that the president is quick to dismiss people if he begins to feel they're an albatross to him. I don't know that this will be that. I do think that there's probably other incoming from a lot of things that RFK Jr. is looking to do when it comes to, I think, telling you what you can eat and drink. I think that in many cases, you know, Republicans were those who opposed Michael Bloomberg's efforts to tell people to get away from drinking sodas. And, you know, Sarah Palin went to the convention and brought her Big Gulp and said, you know, I stand by my Big Gulp. And then Republicans stood against Michelle Obama's efforts to tell parents, you know, what they're allowed to feed their children. And so I think a lot of this is going to eventually create enough of a pushback. The Republicans are going to be like, you know, this is what happens when you nominate a lifelong Democrat who also happens to be the most pro-abortion person ever to lead HHS.
Wow. The language from the president today was interesting, and we should note that Michael Bloomberg is the founder chairman of Bloomberg LP. You know what it's like to prepare an elected official to make a major announcement in front of the media, to roll out a new program, the language that's required in sort of claiming the authority and credibility of the moment. When you hear Donald Trump talking about, this is based on what I feel, he said, that's my opinion about the MMR vaccines. Should this have been more fully baked in the communications office?
Well, yes, but at the same time, I think that one of the appealing parts of President Trump to a lot of voters is that he does speak from the hip.
Okay.
And so that is part of, I think, what people understand they're getting from him. I do think as well, he often beta tests announcements. So he'll see how this plays. Yeah. And if it's a negative reaction, I think you'll see him backtrack from it. If it's a positive reaction, I think you'll see him dig in further.
Was he allowing himself the ability to back out with, this is based on what I feel?
I think you've witnessed enough after the last 8 years or so that he has an enormous ability to backtrack out of things, even when it seems like he's taking a pretty definitive stance.
Marc, Charlie Kirk's funeral was held last night at State Farm Arena in Phoenix, and we heard his widow say that she forgives his killer. At the same time, the president said he hates his enemies. Can both things be true?
Well, I think it was a remarkable testimony by Erica Kirk. I think that the amount of grace that she demonstrated in that moment, I just think is remarkable. And I think that she deserves an enormous amount of credit and support for that. And, she'll be raising 2 children without a dad. I think that part of President Trump's appeal has always been that people view him as a fighter. And for a lot of Republicans, they elect him because they wanted him to come to D.C. and, turn the tables upside down and to fight what is D.C. I'm not sure it was the appropriate venue for that in light of what Erica Kirk's comments are, but I also think that's who Trump is.
I want to bring everyone in the room for that moment. It happened on a Sunday in Phoenix. Here's President Trump from yesterday.
On that terrible day, September 10th, 2025, our greatest evangelist for American liberty became immortal. He's a martyr now for American freedom.
We have to stop in such a busy news cycle, Marc, to acknowledge the unprecedented nature of that event. I mean, you had almost the entire presidential cabinet speaking there, including the chief of staff, Susie Wiles, the president, of course, there, Charlie Kirk's widow, as Kate has established. the importance of that event in terms of closure. I'm curious where your head is right now, because a couple of days ago it was a blame game. The president said we need to beat the hell out of the radical left, and people in many cases feared we were on the precipice of more violence. What did yesterday serve to the nation?
Well, I think in a pretty young career, Kirk did a remarkable job, because for many years conservatives have complained about the imbalance on college campuses, and he identified that problem and looked to build outreach. And I think what he built was pretty phenomenal in a short amount of time. And I think in many cases, as you heard Susie Wild said, credited much of the young male vote that went to Donald Trump. So it is a remarkable moment, but there were remarkable circumstances. I think at the same time, though, there has been a lot of different messaging. I think that as the president looked to, go after Disney and Jimmy Kimmel, and I know there's news on that even as in the last hour or so, but I think for conservatives, for so long, we looked to limit the power of the FCC. It was the Democrats that looked to expand the power. If you go back to the 1980s, it was the Republicans that they were looking to push back on it and to eliminate some of the ability they had to have the fairness doctrine. And many people believe it gave rise to Rush Limbaugh. Republicans should be looking to, I think, candidly, in today's world, what's the purpose of the FCC? The 1930s was really different as today. People can get their communications in all sorts of ways. We should be looking to eliminate that agency, as opposed to saying the FCC should have the power to tell, ABC who they should put on the network and who they shouldn't put on the network.
Marc, you mentioned Jimmy Kimmel, the news that he's returning tomorrow night to ABC. What's the takeaway from this? Did Jimmy Kimmel prevail here, or did the president just establish that he has the final say over free speech?
I don't know that it's that. I think that, I might disagree with the decision. I feel like from a private company, I think Jimmy Kimmel said and done enough that they should have removed him. But that decision should belong with ABC, and viewers across America make their decision whether they tune him in or tune him out. That should not be the heavy hand of government trying to decide, what a private company airs.
Interesting. So he'll be back tomorrow. Does he come in hot, or does he behave in a different manner because of Donald Trump?
I have to believe he'll come in hot because he'll drive ratings, right?
I guess so.
You're in the business. I'm not, but I would have to think that's what he does.
Let's see what works. We'll meet back here the day after. Thank you, Marc, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.